Hey mathematicians, welcome to Hot Topics this week. This week we are going to be focusing on shapes in geometry. So we're going to be looking at some different kind of shapes and classifying them and identifying different characteristics about them. So I'm going to go over some things that you might be thinking of when you classify, or ways you might classify shapes. Now, one big way that we classify shapes, of course, is, is by the number of dimensions. So you've probably heard 2D and 3D and 1D before. So we might classify a shape based on how many dimensions, or 2D or 3D. So if a shape is 2D, that means it has 2 dimensions. If it's 3D, that means it has 3 different dimensions. So let's take, for example, here up top we have some 2-dimensional shapes. They have 2 dimensions. They have length and they have width. For example, this square, when I look at it, it has length and it has width. So it has 2 dimensions, length and width. Now, when I look at a 3-dimensional shape, it's going to have 3 different dimensions. This cube down here has length and width, but it also has height. So a cube is kind of like a 3D version of a square. So we have 3 dimensions: height, length, and width. So how wide, how long, and how tall an object is, or a shape is, whereas a 2D shape, we only have length and width. So that's one big classification. If we only have length and width, then it is a 2D shape. If we have height and width and length, then it's a 3D shape. So think of 2D shapes as something that can only exist like on a piece of paper, like a drawing. You can't hold a 2D shape. You can hold a 3D shape. I can hold a cube, a prism, or a sphere, like a ball. That would be a 3D shape, whereas a circle would be a 1-dimensional shape, or a 2-dimensional shape. So that's the one big way to classify. Now, another way to classify shapes, or think about shapes, is by the number of sides. So as we think of some very, very common shapes, like a circle just has 1 line, so it's 1 side. A triangle has 3 sides. Now, lots of shapes have 4 sides, but some, for example, are squares and rectangles. Pentagons have 5 sides. Hexagons have 6 sides. Heptagons have 7 sides. Octagons have 8. Nonagons have 9. And decagons have 10. Excuse me. So, we can classify a shape by the number of sides. Any shape that has 3 sides will be a triangle. Any shape that has 5 sides will be a pentagon. Now, any shape that has 4 sides, that's tricky because there's actually a lot of specific shapes that have 4 sides. And we call those quadrilaterals. So quadrilaterals are any shape that has 4 sides. Okay? And we call these are kind of the regular ones. So some types of quadrilaterals are kites and rhombuses, parallelograms and rectangles and squares, and then trapezoids and isosceles trapezoids. So any shape on here is a quadrilateral because they have 4 sides. All it takes to be a quadrilateral is to have 4 sides, just like any shape with 3 sides is a triangle. So we could classify shapes based on the number of sides. If they have 4 sides, they're a quadrilateral. If they don't have exactly 4 sides, they are not a quadrilateral. Okay? Now, I want to talk about another way we can classify shapes, and that's by the lines in the shape. So when 2 lines run into each other, they are intersecting. So let's look at this rectangle, for example. This line here, going up and down, going vertically, and then this line here, going horizontally, they touch. So this line touches this line. Since they touch each other, they are intersecting. Okay, so intersecting means that they run into each other. Now, a special type of intersecting lines is parallel lines. Two parallel lines are lines that intersect, like this line and this line in the rectangle, but they intersect at a right angle, at exactly 90 degrees. Okay, so perpendicular lines are ones that intersect at a right angle. And then the other type of line I want to focus on is parallel lines. These are lines that never run into each other. If you drew them out forever on this plane, they would never run into each other, ever. So some lines that are an example of this are like in this rectangle, this long line on top and this long line on bottom. If we extended them out, they would never intersect. They would never run into each other. So we could classify some similarities saying, oh, rectangles are similar to squares because they have some parallel lines. Okay, so parallel lines are lines that never run into each other. And then another way we could talk about shapes are the angle of their sides. So an acute angle is less than 90 degrees, so it's smaller than a right angle. Right angle is 90, and an obtuse angle is bigger than 90. So looking back at these shapes, I look at this isosceles trapezoid and I notice, okay, right here is smaller than 90 degrees, so that is a acute angle, but this angle here between these two lines is bigger than 90, so it is a obtuse angle. And then when I look at the rectangle again, these two lines intersect at a 90 degrees, so they are a right angle. So we could classify shapes based on their number of sides, their angles, their lines, and if they're parallel, intersecting, or things like that. So you're going to be looking at some shapes, identifying them today in your next rotation, and looking at them and figuring out what do they have in common, what kind of shapes they are. Are they quadrilaterals? How many sides do they have? And things like that. So this is a quick refresher on all things geometry, and you guys are going to do awesome.